Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first round of the Generations Challenge, which is being held in Stockholm, Sweden. Now, we have the famous YouTuber and aspiring Grandmaster candidate, Levy'S Rozman, playing against the world-famous Swedish Grandmaster, Pia Cramling. Now, Pia Cramling has been around for a very, very long time. She's been consistently ranked in the top 10 women in the world. She is getting a little bit older, so she's not as competitive as she once was, but she still is a very formidable opponent, and more importantly, she has tremendous class and can play at the top level still. Alright, so Levy is playing against Pia. Levy is the white pieces. Now, the format is quite straightforward. They're playing 4 games of Classical. I believe they play 8 games of Rapid, or 6 games, and then quite a few Blitz games afterwards. But the Classical games do count for 3 points, whereas Rapid, I believe, count for 2, and the Blitz count for 1. Now, Levy should be a big favorite due to his age and the fact that he plays a lot of Blitz online in Blitz and Rapid, but in Classical, I am expecting Pia to come out swinging. Alright, so let's jump right into the action. Game number 1 being played in Stockholm. Levy with the white pieces, and we start out with the move d4. Here, Pia plays the move d5, and now Levy plays the move bishop f4. Now, Levy probably going for the big memes here by playing the classic London system. In recent tournaments that he's played in Spain, Italy, and New York, usually he's tried to play like Hikaru with openings like knight f3 and e3 and c4, openings like g3, playing some ready systems, and things like b3 and e3 to boot. But Levy comes out playing pretty standard stuff so far. We get bishop f4, Pia plays c5, Levy goes e3, guarding the pawn on d4, and now we get the move knight c6. Here, Levy plays the move e3, and now Pia plays the move knight f6. Now, one thing you always want to keep an eye on when you watch these games is the time usage. Now, thus far, Pia has been moving instantly, but she used a couple of minutes before playing knight f6, and I think the reason is that this setup with e3 and c3 is considered to be a little bit dubious at the upper echelons of chess, or in the upper echelons of chess. Now, normally what happens is white plays this move knight to f3, so if you play a move like queen b6, white can immediately play knight c3, attacking the pawn on d5 and threatening to go knight b5 and knight c7 as well. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance if my arrows are a little bit off because I'm obviously on the road as I do this recap. So, when Levy plays move c3, Pia plays knight f6 after a 6-minute think. We get the move knight d2, and now she plays move pawn takes pawn. Now, it's abundantly clear to me that Pia probably was trying to figure out which system to play, and she decides to try and revert back into a safe setup that she is familiar with. Now, very reasonable choice. She's playing against Levy, who's a little bit lower rated, probably booked to the gills. He's been getting ready for this match for so long that she probably decides, I'm just going to play chess. Now, that being said, it's relatively fine, but taking on d4 is not actually the best way for black to play. Or I should say, if you take on d4, after pawn takes pawn, you should play this move bishop to f5, stopping white from putting the bishop on d3. Instead, Pia plays move g6, we got bishop d3, bishop g7, and now we have the move h3. Now, this is, of course, the very classic system that can come out of the Caro-Kann, which is called the exchange variation, where white creates a structure from b2 to d4, and if black ever goes e6, we, of course, get the classic Carlsbad structure with these pawn chains from b2 to d4 and f7 to e6. Now, again, I apologize for my arrows. I'm on the road, and unfortunately, this mouse is simply not as good as the one that I use at home. So, after h3, Levy plays h3 here. Idea quite simple. If black goes knight h5, you retreat the juicer to h2, and now the bishop stays in the game, whereas after knight f3, knight h5, you can keep the bishop in the game with bishop e3, but after queen to c7 here, now black threatens to go knight f4, and the bishop simply has no scope on this long diagonal. Again, great arrows from me. I apologize in advance. So, after h3, Pia decides to castle, Levy goes knight f3, and now we get the move knight d7. Now, the reason that Pia plays knight d7 here is she's trying to strike in the center by pushing e5. Now, it's a very tough situation here because black really is lacking in plans. If you don't play knight d7, the only other idea that really comes to mind is to play something like bishop f5 here. But because black has already castled in this position and white hasn't, after takes, and g4 here, white tries to open up the king side, open h and g files potentially. A lot of threats here towards this black king, and black can get into trouble very quickly. So, Pia plays knight d7, Levy castles, and now we get the move e5, and of course pawn takes pawn is played. If Levy were to move the bishop to h2, this would be a very embarrassing blunder, because after e4 here, the pawn forks the bishop and the knight. The pawn is also guarded, of course, at the same time, and white will lose material and lose the game. So Levy takes. Pia takes back, we get takes, and now we have the move knight f3. Now at this point, we're out of the opening phase and we're entering the middle game phase of this great game. So in this position, what Levy is aiming to do is he wants to go after this isolated pawn on d5. So let's say black were to trade and go something like bishop e6. After rook fd1, Levy's argument is that this pawn on d5 can become a big weakness later. Let me just illustrate why. Say you move the king back and forth. If white gets the bishop to b3, now this pawn on d5 is under massive pressure, and this isolated pawn will fall on the next move or two. So Levy's trying to argue that this is isolated pawn. Pia's probably trying to argue in this position that even though she has this isolated pawn, there aren't that many pieces on the board, and one weakness is usually not enough to lose the game. Now, Pia ends up playing the move knight c6 after a bit of a think, and this is actually a surprisingly serious error from the positional standpoint. What Pia should have done is actually traded on f3 and then played the move queen to b6, attacking the pawn on b2, and after rook a b1, now you go bishop e6 with the idea of bringing both of D's rooks to the center of the board, and eventually you're hoping to also play d4, opening up scope for the classic wooden shield on e6. So, Pia plays knight c6 instead. Now Levy goes queen to d2. He potentially can play rook d1, trying to move the bishop and target the pawn, just to illustrate a sample line. Something like this, for example, going after the pawn on d5. Additionally, white can play bishop h6 here to try to get rid of the classic fianchettoed bishop on g7. And additionally, white can just simply go rook e1 and rook d1 without even any specific plan of attack. So Levy's got all these great plans. He's trying to play against this isolated pawn. And Pia Cramling here is actually under quite a bit of pressure. And it's looking like Levy might strike first and win this game. So, after queen e2, Pia decides to play the move d4 here, trying to get rid of this weak isolated pawn in the center of the board. And now Levy correctly plays the move c4. Now, if Levy were to trade here, the position becomes immediately very balanced here, because now there are no weaknesses in the center of the board. All the pawns are gone from these three files here. Both sides have pawns, but they're all in the same files. Not a whole lot is happening, and the game should end in a draw. So Levy goes c4 instead. Now he's trying to argue this pawn will become a weakness in the long term. You can play rook d1 again to target it. You can even go bishop e4 using the diagonals for the b's, and this position is quite promising for white. So Pia plays move a5 here. This is a move designed to stop Levy from expanding on the queen side. Let's just say black goes, I don't know, bishop d7. If white gets b4, now Levy is simply pushing Pia up the board very, very quickly here. He has bishop d6, rook e1 as well, and black's pieces are very, very passive, and you still have this weakness on d4. So Pia goes a5 to stop b4, and now Levy plays the move rook fe1. Now I like these moves from Levy here, but what I'm going to say is a little bit of a critique is he starts using a little bit more time than I would like to see here. He spent 6 minutes before playing rook e1. This is a move that I think in a blitz game he would probably play immediately, either rook a d1 or rook fe1. Both moves are fine, but using 6 minutes here already feels like it's a little bit much, because it's a pretty stale position from the standpoint. There isn't a whole lot going on. There's just one weakness on d4, and so you should definitely play for flow, but also you want to try to put pressure on the clock as well. So Levy goes rook e1. Pia plays the move bishop e6. Now this move is a fairly serious mistake here. What Pia should have played is the move a4. Probably a little bit counterintuitive why, but the reason that, let's just say white goes rook a d1 here. Now you can play queen to a5, trying to trade off the queens. If white trades the queens after knight takes a5 followed by bishop to e6, black should be completely fine. And if you move the queen to, let's say, c1, for example, now black can play a move like bishop to f5, and with the rooks coming to d8 and e8 very, very quickly, black is completely fine. So Pia goes bishop e6 instead, and now Levy plays the move knight g5 in a mere couple of seconds. Now, I love this decision from Levy to play the move knight g5, attacking the bishop on e6 here, but also after the move bishop d7 is played, Levy now has a critical moment. He's got 45 minutes on the clock, Pia has 37 minutes. Obviously, you guys can tell from the valuation bar that Levy is much, much better, if not technically winning here, and this is the key moment of the game. So Levy uses about 20 plus minutes here, and he ends up playing this move rook a to d1, which is not the best move in the position. Now, Levy probably spent quite a bit of time here considering the options. There are really, in my opinion, 3 moves that you should consider. And at a certain point after you, let's just say 10 minutes, you should cut yourself off and just play the one that intuitively feels best to you. Now, the 3 moves that I'm referring to are bishop to d6, attacking the rook, c5, opening up scope for this bishop on c4 to hit the pawn on f7, and the move knight to e4 with ideas like knight to c5, knight d6, or even bishop g5 and bishop h6, using the bishop and the knight to attack towards the black king. So, Three options that I like. All of them are good. c5 is actually the best move here. The reason this is the best move is that white simply wants to go bishop c4 on the next turn. And I'm going to give you guys a brutal assessment here. I think that if Levy plays this move, he wins this game within the next 10 moves due to the time situation being up on the clock, combined with the very obvious ideas of bishop c4 and bishop d6 using these bishops. Knight can go to e4. I think Levy wins this game within 10 moves if he plays c5. Instead, Levy plays move rook a d1 after a 24-minute think, and this move itself probably doesn't spoil the advantage, but using so much time and now finding yourself down 15 minutes on the clock becomes a turning point in the game, because when Pia plays move rook e8, you'll notice that she uses 7 minutes here before playing this move. Now, the problem is that when you spend so long on an individual move, you're sort of in this flow state, or not flow state, you're in this situation where you're used to using time, your opponent using time, and there's sort of a balance and a rhythm to the time usage. But when rook e8 is played quickly, now Levy has spent 24 minutes to be precise, on this rook a d1 move, but when Pia goes rook e8 quickly, now you feel like you're on your back heel. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, obviously, as my Levy knows that a lot of the mistakes he makes occur when he gets low on time, and so he's probably thinking, well, Pia's gonna have to think here, she has a lot of moves she can play, but when she goes rook e8 after 7 minutes, now all the pressure goes back on Levy, because now he can't really afford to think for 10 minutes or more, so he ends up down 20 minutes on the clock here, and he gets to 10 minutes or less. Almost certainly he's gonna make a blunder. So Levy plays the move c5 now. Now again, not a bad move, but the problem is that here he plays the move relatively quickly, and again, Pia finds the absolute best move, knight to e5. Now this is actually why, if we go back to this position after bishop d6, rook e8, c5 is not great, because here the knight gets to e5, stopping bishop c4, and that's actually why c5 would have been the best move, because there's no way to stop the bishop from getting on this diagonal. So we have the move rook a d1 being played. We get rook e8 c5. Now Pia plays knight e5. And here the game is really starting to turn. Levy is down nearly 10 minutes on the clock. Pia is starting to press him as well. You'll probably notice that this due to what I would say is her experience. She's been playing chess for a long time. She probably intuitively senses that she's under some pressure here. And when you're under pressure, but you're not in a lot of trouble, and you have fairly easy moves to play, you start moving quicker, because then your opponent starts feeling quite a bit of pressure. And Levy actually starts to crack here. He plays the move bishop to e4. Not a bad move, but again, Pia has a move which is simply not difficult. Levy intends to either take the pawn on b7 or go bishop d5, and Pia plays bishop c6, trying to neutralize the bishop, and now this pawn on d4 can potentially become a seriously passed pawn in the near future. So, Levy plays queen c2. This is a mistake, but at this point, it's really hard to fault Levy, because he's getting low on time, Pia's moving fast, and he almost certainly knows that he's done something wrong, as he has to feel like the advantage is slipping away. So Levy plays queen c2. Now Pia plays h6, attacking this knight, which is simply very wayward. There's no e4 d6 jump anymore, and here Levy is going to have to be fairly careful to not end up worse and or lose the game. So Levy takes knight on e5, we get rook takes bishop, we get knight f3, the trades occur on e4, and now we get to move queen c7. Now, even material here, a lot of simplifications. Levy should be fine in this position here. Pawns all on the same files here, looking like it will be a draw. Now, that being said, while this should be a draw, one thing that's really important in chess, no matter what level you're at, is that when you get to a position you think is a dead draw, it's boring, not a whole lot can happen, you need to pay attention and stay sharp, because when you relax is usually the exact moment that you make a mistake, as I can say from personal experience, having lost so many endgames to the greatest player of all time, Magnus Carlsen. So, after queen takes c5, Levy plays knight to b3, not queen takes pawn on b7, because after rook to d8, you will lose either the knight on d4 or the rook on d1. We get knight to b3, Pia plays queen b4, and now Levy decides to trade the queens. Now, this is a mistake, but again, you see Levy is low on time. He's under big pressure here. Pia is really putting him under the gun on the clock, and Levy finally makes a big inaccuracy with queen takes queen. What he should have played here was this move queen to d5 here, centralizing the queen, creating a bit of a sun ray, as well as a wooden shield in the middle of the board here, and white is only very slightly worse. Additionally, knight c2 would have been another move that would have been okay here, because the b2 and b7 pawns hang, but unlike when the knight's on b3, white can always simply push the pawn to b3 and save the juicer, whereas after knight b3, queen b4, the pawn cannot move forward. So Levy decides to trade the queens. Now we get rook to d7, rook takes a2, rook takes b7, and I suspect that what Levy missed when he traded the queens was this annoying move bishop to f8, guarding the pawn on b4, but now white is going to lose the pawn on b2, and at this point, Levy is going to suffer for the rest of the game. Now, if Levy can defend well, he probably still should draw, but when you look at the time situation here, it seems pretty unlikely. So Levy goes knight d4. We get rook takes pawn. Worth noting that bishop c5 here would have been winning because of the pressure on the diagonal here, combined with the rook on the second rank. But at this point, Pia trying to move quickly, make logical moves. Why not take the pawn? Levy goes rook b8, king g7, rook b7, and now we get to move bishop d6. If Pia were to play the natural move bishop c5, intending to win this pawn on f2 here, unfortunately there's knight to e6 check, forking the bishop and the king. Cannot capture the horse, as you would lose your king and the game. So we get bishop d6. Levy goes king f1, king f6, and now we get to move rook b5, trying to stop Pia from bringing her king closer to this pass pawn that wants to march up the board. We get rook to d2, knight to c6, and now we have the move king g7 being played. Now, king g7 is a very nuanced move, but it makes a lot of sense because if you play a move like h5 after knight b4, you might be thinking, wait, rook b2, you pin the knight, you win the knight or the rook, but now white has knight d5, checking the king and winning the rook on b2. So we get king g7, Levy has to go knight a5, he can't take because now after rook b2, there's no check on f6, and you lose the knight or the rook. So we get knight a5, Pia plays rook c2, knight b7, bishop e7. The idea behind rook c2, by the way, is to simply stop knight c6 here, but also to stop knight c6, but also to go bishop to c5 as well here to win the pawn on f2. So Levy goes knight b7, bishop e7, and now we get to move knight a5, and this is another serious error from Levy. Now, if Levy wants to get to Grandmaster, this is a very important point that I will make, is he's going to have to get used to defending these very miserable endgames where you're down a pawn, down 2 pawns in some rook and pawn endgames, but you have to defend these positions because they are going to start occurring more and more as you get closer to the Grandmaster level, and Levy is not up to the task here when he plays this move knight a5. Now, what Levy should have played was a quiet move like g3 here, simply keeping the knight on b7, so black cannot put the bishop on c5 here, and even though technically this is winning, there is still a very, very long way to go in this position. But after knight to a5, now Pia gets her bishop to c5, there's a kebab on the second rank, there's obviously a 90-degree right triangle as well, and at this point, Levy is going to lose the game. So he plays knight b3. Pia takes, we get king g1, and now we have the move bishop to a7 being played. Now, bishop to e3 would have won the game a little bit quicker, but Pia here probably thought, you know what, just play simple, standard moves, don't get into trouble, because after bishop to e3, you might start getting worried the bishop is too close to the rook after a move like rook to e5, for example, and when you go to a7, there are all kinds of fossils that exist in the position. So, Levy goes king h2, we get rook to f4 guarding the pawn, and now Pia Cramling has 2 extra pawns here, 3 versus 2 on the king side, this pawn on b4, with the king being able to be attacked on the dark squares by this dark square b, Levy should not survive. So we get knight c1, Pia plays rook d4, knight a2, and now we get to move rook d2, a very, very nice finesse here, as once again, if white takes the pawn after rook to b2, the knight gets pinned on b4. So we get knight c1, Pia plays rook b2, knight d3, rook b3. Of course not knight takes pawn here because once again something like bishop d4 and bishop c3 wins the game. So we get knight c1, rook b1, knight a2, and now Pia plays move b3. Now I really like the way that Pia is doing this. Very, very slow, very, very controlled here, not rushing it whatsoever. Even though both players are low on time, she's using her time very well here and just slowly improving the position. So we get b3, knight c3, and now we have the move rook to b2. At this point, there are going to be moves that aren't the top computer moves, but the main thing that Pia has to do here, keep this b pawn on the board, and then at the right moment, start going after this white king on the dark squares. We get knight a4, rook b1, knight c3, and now we get to move bishop g1. Here, Levy plays king g3, we get to move rook to e1, and this is really the all-star move after which Levy should be lost for good. Now, if rook b2 were played here, knight a4, rook b1, it's going to lead to something very similar where eventually you have to move the rook away from the b file. You have to give up the pawn. You really don't want to do that, but in this case, if you don't do it, you aren't going to win the game. So we get rook to e1. Now we have rook takes pawn, rook to e3, king to f4, and here the move g5 is played by Pia Cramling. Now, Levy is really hoping he can get a couple of moves. Say you get one extra move, you can get this knight to b5, break the pin, and guard the rook. Levy will draw the game. But after we get to move g5, king to f5, here rook g3 is played, and now, unfortunately for Levy, as much as he'd like to move this knight to b5, he's going to have to waste time playing rook a3 or rook b1 here, and he's going to lose the pawn on g2, and with 3 pawns versus 1, this is just too much. So we get rook b1, rook takes pawn, knight e4, bishop d4 is played, Levy goes rook b4, we get bishop a1, rook b3, rook g1, knight g3 is played here, and now we have the move king h7. Now, you'll notice here that the bar has gone down a little bit. Pia has not been completely accurate, but one thing that you should remember is that when you get a winning endgame, it doesn't matter how you win it. Even if you're not super precise, as long as you're able to convert no matter how many moves it takes, that is what counts the most. And even if Pia might play 5, 10 inaccurate moves, eventually she'll probably be able to figure out the setup and win the game. So you get rook d3, rook b1 is played, we get rook d6 here, and now we have to move rook b5. Levy goes king g4, we get rook to b4 check, and here we have the move king f3. Now, rook d6 leads to a premature ending here, but at any rate, there isn't a whole lot you can do. You could play something like rook a3, but after check, king g4, and something like bishop to e5. Let's just say you go knight f5, for example. There's rook b4, king h5, rook f4, winning the knight, or checkmating the king on h4. And if you play something like, I don't know, knight e4, there's f5 takes, and bishop b2, winning the rook. It's all very hopeless at this point. So rook to d6 simply hastens the end of the game, but the result is not in doubt, even if Levy hadn't made this final blunder. So we get rook d6. Rook b5 check is played. Levy goes king g4. We get to move rook b4, and now he plays the move king f3. If you go to h5, there's rook to h4, checkmating the king on the h5 square. If you go to f5, there's rook f4, checkmating the king as the bishop covers the other squares. And when Levy goes king to f3 here, the last move without losing material or getting checkmated, Pia plays move rook b3, checking the king, and now Levy resigns the game because no matter which square he moves the king to, g2, g4, or f2, black will sack the rook, with rook takes knight here on g3, and after king takes rook, there's bishop to e5, checking the king, and picking up the rook on d6 and winning the game. So, after rook to b3, Levy Rozman resigns in the first game of this match. I believe it's Generations. I think it's Generations. Battle of the Generations. Levy resigns this game, and with that, Pia jumps out to a very big and commanding 3-0 lead. Now, it's only the first game of classical chess. There's still 3 more classical games. Pia will have white in 2 of those 3 games, so she's definitely in a situation where she can build up an advantage. I think that if I look at this from the match perspective, if Pia can do well in the classical, she can probably build an insurmountable lead, but if the match stays close through the classical portion, the advantage will definitely switch to Levy. So it's going to be exciting as we watch the upcoming games, but at any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first day of the Battle of the Generations between Pia Cramling, the Grandmaster, and Levy Rozman, the aspiring Grandmaster candidate. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with a recap after Game 2 is played tomorrow in Stockholm, Sweden. See you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.